modeling the type of discussions that we would want for kids to be able to share. So showing them what types of communication is appropriate by modeling that for them would be the first thing. And then beyond that, it's just encouraging them to be assertive and using assertive statements. Part of that is to say, like, I can't have that. And then if they're being pushed or still like told to try things with friends, to teach them ways to say no assertively. And then being able to identify an adult who can help when there are challenges. Also, in addition to that, I think that there are a lot of kids who early on, it is pretty easy for them to say, no, I can't have that. I can't have it. For some kids who have a harder time with that, I think that just encouraging and providing reinforcement when they're able, and helping them connect with other kids who are experiencing similar concerns, either in real life or through a platform like this, as well as accessing online or social support groups.
Great. Sorry about that. I was on mute. Dr. Verma, do you want to speak to, for 504 specifically, I know it can be really overwhelming for families to manage the 504 process. Can you talk to a newly diagnosed family? Anna did touch upon steps, but just kind of addressing how you can start the steps and involve the school.
So I think the 504 is a touchy subject for the schools. It's a touchy subject for the parents. It's a touchy subject for the children. So I think it's firstly really important to re-educate the family on why a 504 is needed. Often children or parents will say, I'm not going to get any lunches from school, so why do I need to bother? So it depends on what age group it is. If it's a child who is really young and is going to be affected by arts and crafts and things like that, it's absolutely necessary to have the 504. In a child who is in high school and feels like, I'm not going to take anything from school, why should I bother? My answer, my personal suggestion is that everyone should get a 504. However, if a child is very insistent that they don't want a 504 in high school because of just, I'm not going to be using any of the lunches or anything like that, then I would say allow that child that independence, as I'm sure Ilayna would say, that's empowering the child to be part of that decision making. My sort of rebuttal to the child would be, if you have a lot of symptoms when you eat gluten, what if you get an accidental gluten ingestion at somewhere, then you might have symptoms. And if you have symptoms and you don't have a 504 accommodation and you have a big exam or something coming through or a paper due, no one really will be able to help you out with that. Now, of course, we reach a very slippery slope if we say we're going to do a 504 just for symptoms, and you can get out of doing an exam. So that will not happen. So any children listening, it's not going to happen. But that's my rationale to say that everyone should get a 504, whether you're going to eat lunches or not. So that's the first thing. So first is an education piece that needs to happen of why we need a 504. It's not just because you're going to get a lunch from school. It's not just because you can ask for a hot meal or something like that. That's part of the accommodations. And then again, the child needs to be reassured that when you get the 504, it's confidential and it should not be discussed with the whole world. So your friends will not know. If you don't want them to know, they will not know about it. So when that education piece has happened with the first new patient appointment with your clinical team, the next step is, again, different for different schools. So you need to find out from your school, who is your 504 team? And every school is different. So some will have the nurse, some will have the principal, depending on the size of the school, or a counselor. But you've got to now generate your team from school. we have here at the University of Chicago and most of the celiac centers, there are letters that we would give to you to say that your child does have celiac disease. And therefore you take that letter, and then there's a whole process of what's needed. Every school will have a different sort of, different background that they need. It's really helpful to use those SAGE guidelines. It is extensive, but you can just pick out, and we can share those SAGE guidelines with everyone. It's online, but you can just pick out whatever is pertinent to your child. So if it is high school or middle school or elementary school, you can pick out whatever is pertinent. So all of this sounds very overwhelming. So if I break it down, one is your clinical team needs to tell you why a 504 is needed. The second is you need to find out from your school what's needed, and then communicate with your clinical team, because then your clinical team can help you. Let us ask these questions or whatever is pertinent to the child. And please involve, if your child is a teenager or even their 5-year-olds who have very strong opinions, involve them in part of this process so they know what the accommodations are for them. So they don't get scared if they have to ask for something, but it's part of their plan, and they don't feel like they are too different from others, which is, again, I think, Ilayna, you would probably be the best person to mention, like, how do you really make it in a way that the child does not feel different and they have a 504?
This is great. Well, I want to, Ilayna and Dr. Verma, I just want to note to all participants, we are having a few technical difficulties with our breakout session. So just give us a moment to resolve that as we are talking. But I want to talk about the resources, Dr. Verma and Ilayna, of our team here at University of Chicago, the resources of support and how we can help our families with care. So Ilayna, do you want to take a stab? And then Dr. Verma, I would love for you to round out specifically at our Celiac Center, the ways we can support families in their care.
Absolutely. So in terms of support with or access to psychological supports, there are a number of interdisciplinary programs that, and a growing number of interdisciplinary programs that have embedded psychological supports. So with our GI team, currently we have our embedded GI psychology team that is growing, that we anticipate will continue to grow. And so to be able to access those supports, we would need to, the family would just talk with their care team and request a referral. And from there, we would be able to schedule a follow-up. In addition to the services that are available at the University of Chicago, there's also a number of community supports that are available too. And we're able to offer supports virtually as well as in person.
So from we have both pediatric GI and we have adult GI as well. So we have, if we just look at from a care standpoint, we have Celiac Clinic, which is in the pediatric GI world, run by myself and Anna. So we see our patients together. We also have a specific clinic that is for children with type 1 diabetes, thyroid diseases, and celiac disease. So really looking at celiac and autoimmune and thyroid and all those endocrine diseases. That is with myself, one of our endocrinologists, and Anna. So currently both of these are, the type 1 diabetes one is all Zoom right now. We haven't yet transitioned into in-person, so they're all telehealth. The celiac center ones, we do both in-person and telehealth. So that's for any patient that has either an endocrine disorder and celiac, or they have celiac disease by themselves. And then we have an in-transit program and a transitional program. And then the transitional program is run by our adult gastroenterologists, including Dr. Semrad, Drs. Kupfer, and Dr. Rao. They see our patients as they are the young adults, along with an adult dietitian. So Lori Wellstead is the person who sees on that. So that is where we have from a clinical standpoint. And of course, they see older adults as well, but this is just sort of from a transition program standpoint. We do have a lot of online support in terms of our in-transit. We have a whole booklet that actually has been participated, our teens have somehow also helped us form this. So we have an in-transit, and currently we're trying to build a podcast on that. So we're working through with our children and getting some of these things up and going. We have the, and I know we've alluded to this at many different times, is the family network event. So it's not an education day like this, it's an hour in, and again, we will send out those links to you. It's all Zoom right now. So it's a family network event where anyone, whether it's an adult, pediatrics, children, whatever, can join us, and we discuss different topics. So that is for anyone at all. And then we have a separate program, which is also a Zoom program, and that is exclusively for our teens. It's run by them, it's organized by them, it's a fun time, and it's a teens safe place. So that is the teen program that we have. Again, it's in the evening, an hour. We'll send out the information about that if your teens would like to join us. We want to work with everyone, so we have a good team working with our 504 and also the children that are going to head off to college. So a lot of things going on, a lot of help, a lot of activities. If you have a question and we don't have it, send us a message. We'll make it happen. Rachel.
That's amazing. You will never meet a more passionate person than Dr. Verma. I feel very blessed that our Celiac Center is her baby. So as you can see, we have friends around the country who join us on these programs throughout the month. We are here for everyone. Of course, we have an amazing care team here at the University of Chicago that is supportive of our patients. But with that being said, our breakout session is actually happening. We had a few technical difficulties, but in life, I hope that we are almost done with these technical, challenging situations. But I would like to almost immediately, Dr. Verma, are you okay if we kind of transition right away? Ilayna, Dr. Semrad, and Anna, who is now with our kids, I want to thank you all for giving your time. So much information. I feel like we just identified a ton of new topics for our family network events moving forward. But I would love to welcome quickly, we have a few special guests with us for our next family panel discussion that includes Dina and Shane. If you would like, Goldberg, if you would like to take yourselves back on camera, Anya Gupta and Lucy Rubel. We are really excited to have this discussion together. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Anya. Hi, Dina and Shane. It's great to see your faces. So we are happy to have you guys. Dr. Verma, if you want to start, or if you want me to have Dina and Shane start, but we're going to hear a little bit from each of our participants and then have a discussion.
So I just want to tell everyone that right now, the children, some of the children are on a different Zoom link and going through their activities. So that's part of the reason why we have this, and we forego our break just because it's Zoom and we can forego the break. And the hope is for the next whatever minutes we are going to use here is really for us to have the people who deal with this. So, you know, you heard from experts who may not be living this celiac life, who may not be living a gluten-free life, but the next half an hour or 40 minutes, we would want everyone to really learn from people who deal with this on a day-to-day basis. A parent's view, children diagnosed at different times. And as I tell all my teens, you're still going to be children even when you're 40 years old. So children you are, really to learn from you. And it's not just to hear about life is wonderful. Life is wonderful, but then life is also tough at times. So maybe perhaps I can start off with Dina and Shane. So Shane Goldberg, I've known him for a few years and really has gone through a journey and a half. So Shane, what I'd like is maybe for the next couple minutes or as many minutes as you want, tell us how old you are, where you are in life, what your journey has been like in your own words, whatever you want to say. And mom will not say anything to you. So Shane, it's yours.
Hi, I'm Shane. I'm 13 years old. I was diagnosed with celiac in 2017. It has been a very long, hard, and interesting journey over the last 5 years. There have definitely been some ups and downs, but it only gets better from wherever you are in diagnosis. Our whole family had gotten tested, and my test, we just had a lot of blood tests done and a couple endoscopies. It was just back and forth for a while, and then I was finally diagnosed. It was very hard for the first couple months getting with social life, still being in school and everything, and just continuing to figure out what I can and can't eat. But it only gets better. You start to learn how to read labels, and not everyone understands what you're going through, and a lot of people don't even know what it is. So you just keep pushing, and it only gets better from where you are.
And Shane, you're absolutely right. It has to get better. And of course, you end up with a lot of support, and support is what really makes you feel better in many things, right? It's not just with celiac, but all in life. The support is what one needs. And Dina, how tough has it been to be the support for Shane and for the family in terms of, from a parent perspective, what has this journey been like for you?
So I think the hardest part has been just the emotional aspect of it. There's definitely a lot of extra work and legwork to prepare ahead of time for every single thing that you have to do. But the difficult part is that you don't really know when your child or teen is going to be okay in a situation or when they're going to be really upset by something. So you don't know when an outburst is going to happen. So that's really been the hardest part. But as time progresses, you notice that things that used to be really difficult get easier. And things that used to really matter to Shane or bother him in a social setting, now he seems a lot better at. So that kind of changes over time as they grow and their situations change.
And that's something I guess we all learn. And Anya, I've known you for a short period of time. Tell us about your journey, your age, when you got diagnosed. Maybe if you want to share any symptoms or no symptoms, a little bit about your journey.
Sure. I'm Anya. I'm a freshman. I was diagnosed with celiac in 2019. So I was in 6th grade. And prior to having celiac, I really had no food restrictions, and it kind of came as a shock. My symptoms were pretty atypical. I had trouble swallowing. And 3 or 4 months after my initial symptom onset, I started having trouble eating anything solid. So for 2 or 3 months, I was on a complete liquid diet. I could only have liquids, mashed foods. I lost a ton of weight, and I had stopped playing like all my sports. I played basketball and volleyball at the time. Just had stopped playing all of those, just anything to try to keep my weight up. There was no no one really suspected it was celiac because trouble swallowing isn't really a common symptom. So I had an endoscopy in May 2019 to try to figure out, like what's kind of going on. That revealed damaged villi. Blood work confirmed that, and that's how I pretty much found out I had celiac. So it was definitely like pretty shocking. Didn't know really how to react to it. I remember the first day I found out that I had to go gluten-free. I asked my dad to get me chicken noodle soup, and I ate this entire bowl of chicken noodle soup before it even occurred to me that, wait, noodles have gluten in them. So that's just kind of how it was at first, like figuring out, wait, this has gluten, this is what I can't eat. But it definitely got easier with time. Looking back 3 years later, I definitely know what I'm doing now. I can keep myself safe. I know how to find different resources for like travel. And overall, I would say that like getting diagnosed with celiac with time like builds character, and it kind of helps you have a more like positive outlook on life, finding like the best in tough situations.
It's taught you to be a tough person, huh? Excellent. So Lucy, tell us about your journey. It's been a long journey and how you're adjusting to it. And really, if you want to share your symptoms, that would be good. Anything that you want to share before we delve into other questions?
Yeah, my name's Lucy, and I'm a junior in high school right now. And I was diagnosed a really long time ago. I think I was around 2. And so like back then it was a lot harder to deal with it than it is now because it was a lot less common. And like it wasn't only harder to deal with, it was like harder to diagnose. So I was like really, really sick. I was throwing up everything that I ate, and I was just a baby. So I was like getting really weak, and like I can't really like explain what's going on with me when I'm like that little. So it was really hard for my parents to figure out what was going on. So I went through like a ton of testing, and then they finally came out with a celiac test, and it just took them so long to get around to that test because it was so uncommon back then. Um, but once I was finally diagnosed, my parents were happy because they like finally knew what to avoid now and like how they could just finally make me feel better, even though like it sucks. But it was really hard at first, like for the first few years, because it was very uncommon. So like my mom would order a ton of stuff like on Amazon, for example, because grocery stores like wouldn't really have exactly like things that worked for me. But now like every grocery store that I go into will have like a gluten-free section and stuff like that. So it just shows how it's kind of gotten easier. And like another aspect of my life that it's gotten easier in is like with my friends. I also used to have a hard time socially. I would get really upset when like my friends would eat something that I couldn't eat around me, which like can't really get upset about that because I'm not going to be able to control that all the time. But I've definitely learned to deal with that as I've gotten older. And so I think it just keeps getting like easier and easier as you go and more normal.
And I think, Lucy, when you've been diagnosed such a long time ago, when there were so much hardships, then now seems almost like a breeze. But I'm sure people who are just getting diagnosed, for them to change from what their normal life has been to a gluten-free life, of course, is tough. So Dina, I have a question for you. So when Shane was diagnosed with celiac disease, what was your instinct in terms of what do you do with your home? Because obviously you have other children, spouse, families. Talk to somebody who's just getting diagnosed with celiac disease. I mean, you've lived through this, but your emotions and how you've sort of learned through that, because I'm sure that everyone who gets diagnosed, the parents are first going through, and the children are going through the shock, as Anya mentioned. You have this shock. And then as a parent, you're like, okay, I need to fix this or whatever you need to do. How do you balance that? So from a parent, first of all, what did you do? How do you balance? And then what advice for people just starting on this journey?
So I'm so glad you asked me this question, because this is something that I feel extremely passionate about, given the pendulum and the journey we've been through. So when Shane was first diagnosed, I had started with some tremendous grief and feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to protect my child. How do I protect my child from everything in the world? And I literally started to think of gluten as poison, right? So it's poisoning my son's body. I took the standpoint that we were going to have a completely gluten-free home. I felt like I wanted to have a place in the world where he felt completely safe and felt like he could eat anything he wanted without worrying. And this is a very, very individual decision. I'll just say that, because for some families that works, and for other families, that's not the right approach. So I'm just going to tell you what worked for us at the time, but that doesn't by no means mean that that's the way everybody should go. We chose to have the home completely gluten-free. I cleansed the entire kitchen top to bottom. I got rid of I love to bake, so I got rid of all of our baking pans and tins, worried there might be some gluten in there. We went through a lot of education around that, like what could be saved, what couldn't be saved, what needed to be replaced. And we have had a very, very strict no gluten in our house policy. Anybody who came couldn't even bring anything, couldn't come through the door. And that worked very well for us for a while. Shane felt like he had a safe haven. But the other side of that was, it was definitely a sacrifice for the rest of the family members. We have another son who is 11 now, and he really could only eat gluten outside the house. We all went gluten-free inside the house. And so that worked for a long time. Recently Shane had his 5-year anniversary, and he is doing so well. And we really talked as a family about, what some of the needs were about the other members of the family, and our other son really having some other medical issues and needing to be able to eat some gluten. We also talked about the fact that now Shane has a better understanding of things, and in another 5 years, he's going to be going off to college, and we want him to be able to learn and know how to function in a place where there is gluten. So we were kind of going through different stages, and now we actually started to reintroduce the ability to have some gluten in the house. for other family members. And then I started talking about how we can take precautions to make sure that there's no cross contact, or how we can keep a shared kitchen and things like that. So the journey really has kind of evolved over time. And, I would say the biggest message I would say is, just because you pick one selection at one point, it doesn't mean that it has to be that way forever. So as your family evolves, as your life evolves, you can change course and you can figure all that out. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, the gluten-free food is really expensive. So for some people that might not be the best choice for everybody in the household to have gluten-free food. So really you have to figure out what your family needs and what works to keep everybody comfortable and happy and safe and healthy.
I love that question. And Dr. Verma, I'd actually like to put you on the spot just as a parent, from the parent perspective. How did you, I feel like, key learnings? Now your kids are adults, right? But this is something that has affected your home as well. And what are things you look back at, that advice you would give parents?
So I think, yes, I do have 2 children who have celiac disease and one who does not. And they're all young adults now. And I am very similar to what Dina is saying. I think that when I found out, when my son, he was 6 at that time, was diagnosed with celiac disease, it was actually a relief because there were other diseases that I thought he may have. So it was a big relief that it was celiac and I could go on a gluten-free diet and I know what to do. And as you can hear, it was all that I could do it, I can do it, and not thinking, what can the poor kid do? So I think at that time, as a parent, I was so relieved that there was a diagnosis made, and a diagnosis that I could handle from going on a gluten-free diet. So I think that emotion was there. And then guilt set in, just like Dina said, there was a lot of guilt because again, as everyone knows, I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist, and I used to tell my patients, I still tell them that if I had to pick a disease, what would I pick? It would be celiac. And I felt very guilty that I've said it so many times, God heard, but gave it to my children. So, there's a lot of guilt. But what I did was, in retrospect, probably not the right thing to do, was take out all the gluten from home. Just like Dina, I cleaned out the kitchen, no flour. Even now, there's no gluten allowed as flour, and even though the kids are not at home, so no flour is allowed in my kitchen, whether it's in whichever home I am in, there's no flour allowed. Now, I do have gluten back in the home in terms of breads and cookies and cakes and all those kind of things. They're there. Pasta is there. I think in retrospect, what I did not think about was that child who actually does not have celiac disease. I could have sat down with all my children and talked to them about it. And I do believe that if I had had that discussion with them, as a family, what would we do? My guess would be that my children who have celiac disease, one would have had no opinion and the other one would have said, bring the gluten in. And I think I did not do that. I did it based on what I thought was the best thing to do. And it was the most convenient thing to do, to have all gluten-free options. So if I look back, I probably would say, if your children are older, perhaps you want to have that family discussion and understand, and then have some compromise and have some gluten in your home, because then that child who does not have celiac disease feels like it's not their home anymore, that it's all to do with the person who has celiac disease. So that's a lesson that I have learned. But again, it has to go with what works for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps the first 6 months is totally gluten-free because everybody's trying to learn. You're trying to learn the disease, you're trying to learn cross-contamination and so on. But involving our children is probably something we should do. What do you think, Dina? Should have involved the children?
I agree. I think it has to do with the age of the children as well, though. So, when we first started this 5 years ago, I know my younger one would not have been able to keep things neat, and there would have been gluten everywhere. Versus now he understands it and he's conscious about, washing his hands and putting stuff away and keeping it in a certain place. So I think it really depends on where your kids are in terms of, their ability to follow the gluten-free and gluten rules in the house.
Right. So Anya, let me ask you a question. If your parents asked you that question, and the same question is going to go with Lucy. I'm not going to ask Shane that right now because I don't want him to make his mom feel guilty about her decision. But what would you think about if you can go back and think about when your diagnosis was made, if your parents had gluten-free stuff for you, but there was gluten in the home as well, what would be your reaction?
I think I would have been fine with that. I know, like, personally right now, we are mostly gluten-free at our house because my younger brother, he doesn't have celiac, but he's allergic to wheat. And so it was just easier for my family since like half our household was gluten-free anyway to make everything gluten-free. But like, I think I would have been indifferent to it as long as I was like safe. If I was like reacting to it, I probably would have a little bit of a preference to, go completely gluten-free. But every time we've had gluten in our house, if my parents have like brought like a cake, cookies or something like that, I've been fine. So I think I would have been like okay with it.
And how about you, Lucy?
To be honest, I was like a pretty selfish child. Like when I was diagnosed, like when I was little, I remember like I'm making my mom pinky promise me that she would never eat gluten again because I was like so jealous and so upset. And so we were definitely like a very like gluten-free household, except for like I think that we kept bread there always, but we just had like a separate toaster and things like that. But I agree, it's like an age thing. I don't think that my brothers would have been able to like totally be safe with everything when they were younger. But now we definitely keep gluten in the house and they know exactly how to handle it. And one of my other brothers has celiac and he doesn't follow it as much, but he still is aware of it, and like they make sure to like clean everything off when they're finished. So right now I'm totally fine with there being gluten in the house, but I can't say the same for if I were asked when I was little.
So how do you tell me a little bit about what do you do at home to keep things safe in the kitchen when you have both gluten and gluten-free? Help the audience if there's somebody just starting off, how can if they want to have a dual kitchen, what kind of things have you utilized in your kitchens, Lucy, and then Anya, and then we'll go to Shay.
I think that we just have like a lot of separate things and it helps to like color code them kind of. Like we've always used, I think, red for gluten-free and like green for gluten. Super random, but like we have different toasters and like different spatulas, different even like strainers for your pasta. It's like little things that you wouldn't really think about. And then it's also, we have different drawers in our pantry for gluten. So I would say that my pantry is probably like 80% gluten-free, 20% gluten. And so we just have like one or two drawers that are designated for the gluten items so that they can kind of stay separated. We didn't really use gluten-free pots and pans or anything like that, but definitely things that would like leave crumbs behind and everything like that, we made sure to like double up on.
And then Anya, what's your kitchen like?
It's pretty similar to what Lucy was saying. Our refrigerator, we have like a separate, like one of those vegetable drawers. We've just turned those into just a gluten drawer. So all like the breads and anything that like cakes or anything that has gluten in it goes into those drawers. We also have a separate cupboard for gluten-free like crackers and stuff like that, separate toaster. One thing that we did do a little bit differently is we do have gluten-free pans, especially like one pan where it's a little hard to get all the like the residue off of it from gluten. That specific pan is always gluten-free and we have it marked off with like a pan handle that's like a separate color. So that's pretty much just things that could leave behind crumbs, just making sure those are separated.
Thank you. And Shane, what's going on in your kitchen now?
So it's a little different, but we usually, if we are going to bring in some food from maybe outside, we would use, for everyone who is gluten-free, we'd use like plates or what we usually have. And then for my brother, who, if he's eating gluten, we'll usually give him like a plastic plate and plastic utensils. So it just goes in the trash right away and there's not a lot of gluten left behind. And he typically sits in, we all have our own spots at the table, and he typically sits in his own spot. And we also sometimes bring in, maybe some bread or cupcakes to store in the pantry sometimes. And again, we just use the plastic for him just to dispose when he's done.
The other thing we do is anything that's getting stored in the freezer or the refrigerator that has gluten, I keep on the bottom so that in case anything drips or falls, it doesn't fall onto any of the gluten-free stuff. And we make sure to clean the gluten-free area of the table first, and we do the gluten section last when we're cleaning the table up at the end of the night.
That's a great tip and definitely important. I want to kind of shift gears, Dr. Verma, if that's okay with you. And especially for Shane and Lucy and Anya, being social and with friends is such an important part of your life. And I think we have a lot of families on here, whether you're going out to dinner with friends or heading to a bar bat mitzvah, how do you handle, what is the thought process before you head out? And Shane, if you want to talk about just and start out, how do you, when you think about you're going out with friends or heading to an event, what is kind of the prep and thought process that do you involve mom? Do you just think about things on your own? Why don't you start there?
Well, so it depends on the bar mitzvah and when it is, and if the caterer can supply gluten-free meals for me. I have gone to bar mitzvahs where my mom will call ahead and we'll ask the parent of the bar mitzvah, the planner, if the caterer can't supply gluten-free. Or other times I'll just eat ahead and just bring some snacks like in my coat pocket. And then if I'm ever hungry through the night, I'll snack on something. But it really does depend on the comfort level of whoever's going. And especially with the social aspect of it, a lot of my friends do know that I am gluten-free. And one of my friends is also actually gluten intolerant. So they all know. And especially I was at a play last night and all my friends got pretzels and I had just gotten something else and they all knew and they were fine with it. So it really does depend on the situation, but whatever's good for you, everyone has their own preference.
One thing I would just want to chime in and mention to parents is really the importance of focusing on what is making your child comfortable. Because when Shane was younger, I would really always try to give him a substitute or have something that the gluten-free version of the same thing so he didn't feel different. And he would give me these eyes of like, total, like, please just don't do anything. And then he would almost boycott sometimes and just not eat at all because he didn't want to have something different than somebody else. So really sort of getting to the core at what will make your child feel most comfortable and picking that path, because ultimately that's what's going to be the most successful. And we want them eating, we want them eating, being nourished, but we want them to do it in a way that's comfortable for them as opposed to boycotting eating.
Absolutely. So Lucy, when you're heading out with friends, you're obviously at a different age and different phase. If you guys are going to go head out to dinner, how do you manage? Prep, do you try to suggest a restaurant? Just talk through that thought process before you head out.
When I go to dinner with my friends, there's always an option really, but it also kind of depends on the restaurant for what I'm going to get. And so sometimes I'll look up the menu beforehand and kind of get familiar with it so that I don't have to take a long time when I get there to figure things out with the waiter or waitress. Sometimes I'll call ahead if I don't want to have to deal with it when I'm there, I guess. It's really helpful when the menus have their items marked like gluten-free and stuff like that. And you can also look it up online or there's plenty of different apps and things like that definitely help. And I definitely like eating at restaurants that I'm familiar with. But if it's my friend's birthday dinner or something like that, I'm obviously not gonna request to go somewhere else. So there's always just a way to figure it out. And I haven't gone to a restaurant in a really, really long time when there's not zero options for me, I feel like. And all of my friends are very, very understanding of it. They even some of my friends keep gluten-free snacks in their house just specifically for me because they're just so understanding. And it also helps because one of my best friends is also gluten-free. So we kind of stick together like that, and that makes it a lot easier for us.
That's great suggestions, Lucy. And Anya, what about you? You're in high school now. Both you and Lucy are in high school. So I'm specifically curious for you to share, how you navigate this with friends. I know it sounds like Lucy gives suggestions of restaurants sometimes, except if it is a special occasion, or looks up menus. What do you do?
My first thing is always like, if I can, I like to pick the restaurant because then I know the staff, I know if it's safe. That's just always the easiest go-to thing. If it is like at someone's house or something, like I personally find it's just easier to eat at home, and just like if I don't want to go around like, telling people that I'm not eating because I'm gluten free, I can just say that like, oh, I'm not hungry, and I actually won't be hungry because I've eaten before. I find that that's sometimes easy depending on the situation. Like if it's a bunch of close friends, then I'll take my food. They'll know why I'm doing it. Just kind of easier that way. But if it's with like people I don't know as well, or like people I'm just getting to know, it's just sometimes easier just eat at home.
And when you're going out to eat, as you've been going through the years, who does, and I'm sure it depends on the age, but do you think, and maybe Dina, you can share in the sense of you're going out to eat, and of course, this is before the pandemic, you make the phone calls to find if it's a safe restaurant. Shane wants to be part of it. And then I'm going to ask Anya and Lucy, what would you have liked done in retrospect? What should your parents have done? What happens with eating out? Who decides? So Dina, maybe you can give us a parent's view on that.
Sure. So typically we rely a lot on the Find Me Gluten-Free app. That seems to be really helpful. I don't know if everybody else uses it, but especially if we're traveling or in a different town. So I generally will call ahead. I usually do it in advance if I can, a couple days, just to make sure that they can actually stock what they might need in the restaurant. Some restaurants are not willing to, but some restaurants, and even if you are from a travel perspective, I'll throw that in there as well, would be really surprised at what places are willing to bring in for you. So a lot of times they'll say, oh, if we know you're coming, we can bring in gluten-free bread or bring in gluten-free pasta. Even some restaurants that don't typically serve pasta have done that for me for special occasions. So I place a call, I find out what the options are. The key thing is I always ask for the manager, because a lot of times someone who's just answering the phone doesn't really have the background. So if you specifically ask to speak with the chef or the manager, they are more aware of it. And then you kind of use your guts, because sometimes there'll be restaurants where you get off the phone and you're like, they have no idea what they're saying they can do it, but they really don't. And then we move on to the next restaurant. So I kind of assess whether they really understand cross contact and whether they can handle it for us.
And Shane, do you get involved with some of that discussion now? Were you getting involved with it earlier? Where are you in your process of learning those questions? What questions should I ask? How comfortable am I doing it?
So typically my mom does call ahead, and then she'll tell me, Shane, they can make A, B, C, D for you. And then I would typically say, all right, that sounds great. Sometimes when I'm there, if I look at the menu and it's like salmon with breadcrumbs or something, like I'll ask, could you do the salmon without the breadcrumbs and make it gluten-free? And that's typically what I would do. It can be hard, especially if you're traveling in a country doesn't speak English, but it is very helpful to call ahead and ask and figure out what they can and can't do.
So if you get there and you like something else than what mom gave you in that ABCD, you'll take that initiative and ask the same questions, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So Anya, what do you do, and how do your parents handle this? And do you agree? Should it be done differently? What would you say?
So for me, because I was diagnosed so late, my parents wanted to make sure that, like as I'm approaching like college and, like stuff like that I would know how to, order for myself, find out how to keep myself safe. So it's always kind of, for the most part, been me reaching out to restaurants. I know in the beginning, my parents were a little bit more involved, trying to help me like come up with like questions, try to figure out how to like get a gauge for like kind of, whether something's going to be safe or not. But for the most part, I call the restaurants, I talk to the managers. The questions are usually asked by me at the restaurant itself. I'll usually speak to either like the chef. But I think I personally like that approach, because it kind of like, if I'm with my friends by myself, I know that I can like take care of myself. And that's just my experience. I know it's like different for everyone, but yeah.
Sure. And Lucy, how about you? Eating out?
Yeah. I agree. I definitely do most of the question asking. I will say, like, sometimes I'm just not in the mood to like go through the whole ordeal with like my waiter or waitress. Sometimes I just want to like kind of forget about it. So I'll just like either order something like easy that I know that I can have, or I'll like have my mom talk because like I'm just not in the mood. But like 90% of the time, I'd say I do the asking of the questions, and you have like a pretty like solid list of like questions that I asked every time, like consistently, I guess. Um, and I also always like double, triple check that they're like giving me the right dish, I guess. Especially if it's a waiter or waitress that seems like unsure of themselves. Um, and like again with that, a waiter or waitress that doesn't really know what they're talking about, it's definitely good to ask for someone else because you'd rather like kind of make a hard time out of it than end up getting sick. Like it would suck in the moment, but it would suck more if you end up eating gluten and having a reaction.
So what I'm hearing is, one is learning for yourself rather than, again, parents will help out and then you learn and then be your own advocate so that even when you get there and there's something different you want, you'll speak up. Where do you think all this learning has come from? Because obviously, when you are diagnosed with this condition, how did you guys become so comfortable? I'm curious. So who wants to take that one on first? All right, Lucy, go for it.
I mean, for me, it kind of comes really natural, like being diagnosed at 2, like I literally grew up with it and like I haven't really ever known anything else. Like I've never just looked at a menu and been like, can I please have the blah blah blah? Like, you know what I mean? Like it just feels super natural to me at this point. And obviously I wasn't ordering for myself when I was 2 years old. So like I've definitely like grown up like watching my parents handle it for me and then I've learned from them. And like you see that in other parts of my life too. Like I used to, every time I wanted to eat something, I would text my mom a picture of the label and be like, are these ingredients gluten free? But then I like slowly learned like it's not like it's not as hard as I think it is once I learn and like start figuring it out and trying it on my own. So I think like growing up with it definitely helped me a lot because it just feels natural to me and just kind of like following my parents' example.
Anya, Shane?
For me, I would say that one thing that really helped was I had a friend who had celiac. Before I found out I had celiac, I didn't know she had celiac, but she helped me come up with like and brainstorm different questions I could ask waiters. And I kind of use that as like a template every time I went out. I also used like Dina and Shay were saying, like the Find Me GF app. Like that website gives you a pretty good idea of like where people are like aware of what celiac is. And I started kind of with those restaurants first because then it's a lot easier to talk to people who are knowledgeable about celiac. And that kind of helps you like build the experience. So walk into restaurants and like, can I speak to the manager? Do you guys have gluten-free options? Is it free of cross-contamination? Just those kind of like baby steps. And eventually it's almost like second nature after a while.
Excellent. Shane?
So I learned from a lot of experience, just watching my mom, like if I go to the grocery store and I just see her, turn the box and just look at it for like a couple seconds, I'm like, oh, he's checking the label. So sometimes, if I wanted something, I just grab a box, not knowing what I was doing and just looking and trying to see if it was gluten-free. It does take time, to figure out how to read labels or look it up on Google or find the gluten-free or other apps, but you get the hang of it after and you eventually get a sense of what is and what's not gluten-free.
One thing I would say is really just trust your gut, because as you're going through and like asking people questions, you get so many people who brush you off, and then you kind of know that maybe we should move on, and others that actually take the time to ask the questions back to you about what you're really looking for. As a quick anecdote, we had a situation once where we were going to go buy something for Shane, and it was at some farmer's market, and I was probing and asking if the items were gluten-free, and then finally the gentleman got frustrated with me because I kept asking it in a different way just to make sure it was safe, and he goes, "There's no milk in any of our products." And I said, "Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and have a great day." And we kept walking because clearly he was like, "It's gluten-free. There's no milk." And I said, "Okay, well, so that's a perfect example where you start to understand and you just sort of trust your gut and move on."
So Dina, you actually touched on something great, and it actually came up in our Q&A. And I open this to all of you. What are like the top 3 questions when you're at a restaurant that you ask your waiter? Just educating again our newly diagnosed, as we're empowering our friends here on this webinar. What are the things that you should ask? The top 3 questions when you walk in. Know who wants to go first? Go ahead.
Did you want me to take it?
Sure.
So the key question really that I focus on is the cross contact issue. And like a lot of times for Shane, it's pasta. So I just make sure that they're using separate strainers, separate utensils, separate water, all that kind of stuff. And that they understand that that has to happen. And sometimes they'll look at me with like a deer in headlights. And then I know that they're really not doing that in the back. And other times they're very clear that they do take those precautions and they understand. And we also call it an allergy a lot, because even though it's technically not an allergy, when you say allergy, then immediately everybody gets it and they understand that you can't have the cross contact.
Fine. Lucy, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with that. It kind of just like helps them understand it a lot better. I'd say another thing, kind of going back to like the cross contact issue, I always ask if they have like a dedicated fryer, because a lot of times they will, but it's also just always good to know. Also, if they don't have their menu items labeled as like gluten-free, vegan, all of that, it's always worth asking if they have a gluten-free menu, because a lot of restaurants don't, but like more and more I'm starting to see them. And that just like makes the whole thing so much easier. And sometimes I don't even think of asking when like it just could have been avoided altogether. And yeah, I think that the main questions that I ask are all around cross-contamination and like the details of that.
That's great. And Anya?
I think for me, like first, like just introducing, like as soon as the waiter comes, like just saying like, oh, I have like a gluten allergy, like they said, that just tends to be the easiest thing, and just automatically like registers. Okay, like we got to make sure there's no cross contamination. It's important, stuff like that. And when you say that, it kind of gets you a good idea. Sometimes they'll just like tell you like, we have these measures, we have this dedicated area, we have these gluten-free foods. And if there's any sort of like hesitation that comes with that, that's when it kind of registers in your head, like maybe this isn't the safest idea. And in my experience, I found that like, even if you have like a slight concern, it's just better to like walk away from this. It's just not worth eating a food that might be like unsafe. Like the experience of the restaurant is not going to be worth like, the after effects of getting sick. And so just those kind of questions, ask cross-contamination, it's really important if they have like dedicated areas. And there's a lot of times where they'll have a gluten-free menu. And then when it comes for like cross-contamination, they'll say like, oh, we can't guarantee cross-contamination. That's like an important thing to register. Like even if they have a gluten-free menu, doesn't mean that it's like celiac safe.
Those are
What
great.
they have on the menu, one of the points that I just want to make is when they have on the menu that it's celiac friendly, for me, that's red flags, because celiac friendly is sort of, okay, we are friends with you, but we really don't take care of it from a cross-contamination standpoint. So I look at a menu, and if on the fine print it says it's celiac friendly, I'm going to grill you, and my children will walk away from that restaurant, because again, it's very embarrassing for them. So sometimes I'm actually given instructions before we go somewhere. You will not ask any questions today. So like, okay. But I can't resist myself. But if it says celiac friendly, be careful. I would ask the questions. And just like everyone has said, if your gut is saying, this is not a place, then don't eat. Don't eat there. However embarrassing it might be, it's much better to be safer than sorry later. But there are certain things, those celiac friendly things are just not friendly enough for me. So I walk away from that one.
Well, Dina, Shane, Lucy, Anya, thank you for your time. I think this is such a nice way to round out our discussion today from real life experience and ways we can apply your tips and insights. And it was great to see the consistency. And I think for all of us, giving ourselves grace, and things change as you grow with living with celiac, and it was just a great discussion. But Dr. Verma, I would love to turn it over to you to just kind of close out our morning with final thoughts. But again, I want to thank Dina and Shane and Lucy and Anya and all of our speakers today. This was a wonderful morning. So Dr.
And
Verma.
I want to add my thanks. I think the future is great with these young people. I think that that's what we need to do as parents. We empower them. As providers, we empower them. And the future is going to be really great. Listening to these three confident young people makes it feel like life is going to be good. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, I thank everyone who's joined us today for this webinar. It's been a lot of things, and I'm sure people feel like we should have done more things in a different way and maybe more in depth with things, maybe have more panels with young people and parents and so on, different age groups. And we hope to have that. We will do that with our family network events, and hopefully we'll meet everyone. I think we'll send links out to the particular talks and so on. Keep the dialogue going. Work with your children, work with your clinical team. We are here for you, and we'll send you all the stuff. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Enjoy the good weather wherever you are. And thank you again, Shane, Lucy, and Anya. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.